Is Melania Trump planning to divorce Donald Trump because of his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein? That question might sound shocking. It might sound like tabloid speculation. But when you step back from the headlines and look closely at what is happening in courtrooms, filings, and quiet legal maneuvering, it becomes impossible to ignore. Because what is unfolding right now does not look like loyalty. It does not look like unity. And it certainly does not look like a couple preparing to weather a storm together. It looks like separation. Legal separation first, personal separation later, and in high-stakes political scandals, that order matters. For years, Melania Trump has played a very specific role in Donald Trump's public life. She stayed silent. She avoided interviews. She rarely defended him directly. And when controversy erupted around Donald Trump, Melania often disappeared entirely from view. That silence was frequently interpreted as indifference or distance or even quiet disapproval, but silence can also be strategic. Silence can be protection. Silence can be survival. What has changed now is that Melania Trump is no longer merely adjacent to Donald Trump's legal exposure. She's being pulled directly into it, and once that happens, everything changes. To understand why divorce is now being discussed seriously, not as gossip but as legal strategy, we need to talk about three interconnected things. First, Donald Trump's long-documented social relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. Second, the legal mechanism that is now threatening to force sworn testimony. And third, why Melania Trump's incentives may now be fundamentally different from her husband's. This is not a story about romance. This is a story about risk. Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein knew each other. That is not speculation. That is not rumor. That is documented fact. They appeared together in photographs. They attended the same social events. They moved in overlapping elite circles in New York and Florida during the 1990s and early 2000s. Donald Trump himself publicly acknowledged knowing Epstein and described him as someone he had known for years. Trump has since insisted that he distanced himself from Epstein long before Epstein's legal downfall, claiming he banned Epstein from Mar-a-Lago and was never close to him. But journalists, witnesses, flight records, and photographs complicate that narrative and show sustained social proximity.
Knew him. I had a falling out with him a long time ago. I don't think I've spoken to him for 15 years. I wasn't a fan.
Epstein, who has pleaded not guilty to federal sex trafficking and conspiracy charges in New York, is fighting to be released from jail while he waits for his trial. His lawyers now offering an explanation for the most mysterious item uncovered in a search of Epstein's Manhattan mansion. An expired foreign passport revealed by prosecutors as they tried to convince a judge that Epstein is a serious flight risk.
There has been no criminal charge against Donald Trump related to Jeffrey Epstein, no conviction, and no formal finding of wrongdoing in a court of law. But exposure does not require guilt. Exposure requires questions. And questions become dangerous when they are asked under oath. That is the scenario Donald Trump has spent years avoiding. His legal strategy has been consistent: delay, deny, discredit, distract, and above all, avoid sworn testimony whenever possible. He has fought subpoenas, appealed depositions, settled cases rather than testify, and invoked privilege broadly. That strategy worked until the current legal situation, because this time it does not begin with Donald Trump, it begins with Melania Trump. Melania Trump, through legal counsel, issued a written defamation threat against a journalist over reporting connected to Epstein. It was designed to intimidate and silence, but instead of retreating, the journalist sued first.
Author Michael Wolff has claimed in a lawsuit that First Lady Melania Trump threatened to sue him for over $1 billion in damages if he didn't retract Jeffrey Epstein-related statements he made about her.
That single move created a live civil case. And once a civil case exists, discovery becomes inevitable. Discovery means depositions, documents, emails, texts, calendars, photographs, and sworn testimony. Discovery is where lawsuits stop being public theater and start becoming private nightmares. This is where Melania Trump's incentives diverge from Donald Trump's. If she testifies falsely to protect him, she risks perjury. If she testifies truthfully and the truth damages his narrative, she exposes him. There is no safe middle ground. Under oath, she is not a spouse or a political symbol. She is a witness. And witnesses do not sacrifice themselves for someone else's legal strategy, especially when the exposure is growing. This is why divorce enters the discussion as strategy rather than emotion. Divorce creates legal distance, financial distance, and narrative distance. Once divorced, Melania Trump is no longer assumed to share knowledge, intent, or responsibility. She becomes a separate legal entity with her own interests. In court, that distinction is enormous. Divorce reshapes privilege claims, testimony dynamics, and how silence and cooperation are interpreted. In elite legal circles, divorce is often insulation. Everything about Melania Trump's recent behavior points toward insulation. She has not appeared at Donald Trump's court hearings. She has not publicly defended him. She has not joined coordinated messaging. Instead, she has withdrawn. This is not passive silence. It is active distance. At the same time, Trump's Epstein problem has not faded. Documents continue to surface, photographs reappear, and journalists revisit long-buried reporting. Denial only works when the questions stop. Discovery ensures they do not. If Melania Trump testifies, she will be asked about her own past, how she met Donald Trump, who introduced them, who was present in those circles, what she knew and did not know, and whether Epstein was a presence in those environments. These questions will be asked under oath. Every answer becomes permanent. Every contradiction becomes exploitable. For someone who curated silence for decades, this is catastrophic. From Donald Trump's perspective, a spouse preparing for independent testimony is a liability. His strategy depends on loyalty, silence, and delay. A spouse considering legal separation threatens that strategy. Once Melania Trump's legal survival diverges from Donald Trump's political survival, the marriage stops functioning as a shield and becomes a fault line. History shows that when legal exposure grows, inner circles fracture. When silence becomes dangerous, self-preservation takes over. Jeffrey Epstein remains central because he represented leverage. He cultivated secrets, kept records, and positioned himself as someone who knew things about powerful people. That is why his death did not end the story. It was never just about him. It was about who feared what he knew. Donald Trump has tried to draw a hard line, insisting he cut ties early and knew nothing. But the public record complicates that story, and the legal process does not care about spin. It cares about consistency. Once sworn testimony enters the picture, inconsistencies become liabilities. That is why Melania Trump's situation is so delicate. She cannot control the questions, the documents, or other witnesses. She can only control her position, and that position appears to be shifting away from Donald Trump. Divorce in this context is preemptive self-defense. It is a legal firewall. It is often executed quietly before the public realizes what is happening. By the time divorce becomes public, strategic decisions have already been made. No one outside their legal teams can say with certainty whether Melania Trump is planning to divorce Donald Trump because of his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein. But the signs point to something undeniable. She is preparing for a future where she cannot rely on his legal strategy to protect her. She is preparing for testimony, for exposure, and possibly for independence. Once you testify, everything changes. Once you speak under oath, silence ends. Staying married to someone whose legal problems are accelerating becomes a risk, not a partnership. This is not about love or loyalty. It is about survival. And in the world of power, survival comes first. If Melania Trump does testify, it will mark a turning point not just for Donald Trump, but for the mythology around him. Myths rely on silence, and silence is ending. What we are watching is not a public breakup. It is the quiet rearranging of incentives. When incentives change, outcomes follow. The question is no longer whether the marriage looks strained. The question is whether it still serves a purpose. And history tells us what happens when it does not. Witnesses do not go down with the ship. They step off before it sinks. Is Melania Trump planning to divorce Donald Trump because of his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein? That question might sound shocking. It might sound like tabloid speculation. But when you step back from the headlines and look closely at what is happening in courtrooms, filings, and quiet legal maneuvering, it becomes impossible to ignore. Because what is unfolding right now does not look like loyalty. It does not look like unity. And it certainly does not look like a couple preparing to weather a storm together. It looks like separation. Legal separation first, personal separation later, and in high-stakes political scandals, that order matters. If you found this analysis useful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps support this work and ensures you don't miss future updates and in-depth reporting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.